My friends, it's official, France has been evicted, kicked out from all its bases in West Africa. A couple days ago, the French army said farewell and handed over all its military bases in Chad. A truly historic moment. The French flag that flew side by side with the Chadian banner for over 60 years has now been lowered.
Do me a favor, please. Get out of here. Get out of here, man!
It's really the end of an era. For 3 years now, France has been effectively losing one military base after another in Africa. And this represents a geopolitical turning point. Here from France 24, time to move on. France faces gradual decline of influence in Africa. Chad, withdrawal of the last French troops. The ultimate symbol of French decline in Africa. So in this video we will try to understand why all this happened. Why all these African countries suddenly cancelled their military cooperation with France. But we'll also take a look at the effects this can have on the region, as well as what it means for France as a world power. Now the funniest thing in this story is that throughout 2024, French President Macron sent his special envoy to Africa, Jean-Marie Bockel, whose mission was to secure the region. This special envoy, Bockel, proudly stated, "No request for the departure of French soldiers in Ivory Coast, Gabon, and Chad." Can you guess what happened next? That's right, not long after this Chadian debacle, Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire also politely showed France the exit. That's how France was kicked out from 7 countries back to back within 3 years. Good thing Macron didn't send his special envoy to Brussels, or France would have been ejected from the European Union. Jokes aside, it's also important to mention that France is in the process of a large-scale redeployment out of Africa. And all I can tell you for now is that France really likes this flag. They removed all the soldiers from this flag only to transfer them to this one. Welcome to History Legends. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads, so make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. For those that are new to the headquarters, here's a quick summary of the timeline of events in the Sahel region. January 2013, Operation Serval. The Malian government called the French army for help against Tuareg rebels. This was followed by Operation Barkhane, a counterinsurgency mission across the entire Sahel region. So first of all, the Sahel region is this entire region of West Africa that stretches from Senegal all the way to Sudan. And the geography is marked by a semi-desertic landscape. Now, a couple months after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, came some sort of domino effect. August 16, 2022, French withdrawal from Mali. December 15, 2022, the last French troops depart from the Central African Republic. 22nd of January 2023, the military junta in Burkina Faso suspends partnership with France and orders French troops to leave within a month. The 22nd of December 2023, immediate withdrawal of all French military personnel from Niger. That's how France redeployed everyone towards Chad, where they already had 1,000 servicemen present. I'm really wondering who could be behind all this. It's not a coincidence that the Central African Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, all 4 of them, turned to Moscow for their security. Yet, despite the arrival of hundreds of Russian mercenaries, the Sahel region is witnessing a sharp increase in violence. So let's go through the largest military incidents that happened in this region in the last 6 months. Let's start with Mali. On the 17th of September 2024, jihadists launched a major attack right in the capital, Bamako. They struck the police academy and the airport. During this attack, Malian security forces lost 70 KIA and another 200 wounded. We can also talk about what happened on the 13th of February, where 4 police officers were wounded in an ambush on Mali's minister's convoy. And this is without to mention the huge ambush that completely annihilated an entire Wagner convoy at the end of July 2024. If you're interested, I made an entire video about it, link in the description. As for Niger, the situation is also highly volatile, with over 150 soldiers KIA since March 2024. One of the latest incidents happened on the 3rd of February. It involved an ambush that caused 10 fatalities for Nigerian security forces near the border with Mali and Burkina Faso. After France got kicked out of Niger, the Americans were happy because the ban hammer did not apply to the 1,000 US military personnel that were also present in the country. But not for long. 6 months after the departure of French forces, Russian instructors showed up and Niger suddenly demanded the immediate departure of all US troops. That's how by August 2024, the US military left Air Base 101, located in Niamey, and Air Base 201, situated near Agadez, which cost US taxpayers $280 million. However, the country whose security situation is the most critical is Burkina Faso. On the 11th of June, 100 soldiers were reported as KIA after a jihadist raid in Mansilla. On the 29th of June, 24 Burkinabe troops KIA. The next day, another 76 security forces fell on the battlefield. 31st of July, about 50 soldiers KIA near Napade. On the 8th of August, jihadists ambushed a Burkinabe army convoy, leaving more than 150 soldiers KIA. January 8, 2025, another ambush and another 28 members of the security forces KIA. The latest of these attacks happened on the 25th of January, when the jihadists took over a military base in Pama, near the border with Benin and Togo.
Into the breach!
In this footage, you can see hundreds of jihadists on motorcycles, reenacting Mad Max the African saga, as they swarm government positions while supported by technical equipped with a 14.5 caliber machine gun. And here you can see the aftermath with all the equipment they have captured there. Overall, more than 428 Burkinabe soldiers KIA in the last 7 months. What a surprise! But what about the Wagner PMC? Turns out deploying 300 mercenaries to secure a country the size of Belarus could not really do much more than to protect the presidential palace. And of course the local vodka supplier. Actually, I lied. The latest attack happened on the 12th of February, where another 12 Burkinabe security forces were reported as KIA after rebel drone strikes near the border with Togo and Benin. After the evacuation from Niger, one could think that for France, the plan was to recenter all its assets in Chad, a country that held a very strategic position in Africa due to its geography. However, in October 2023, French General Ozan stated, "Chad is only a transit country. It is not a re-articulation of our system from Niger to Chad." And it seems this restructuring was generalized to the entire French military bases across the continent. On the 30th of January 2024, Le Monde reported, France begins drastic reduction in military personnel in West Africa bases. Overall, only 600 French soldiers were to remain in the region, namely 300 in Chad, 100 in Gabon, 100 in Côte d'Ivoire, and another 100 in Senegal. That's nothing, that's not even the strength of a battalion. That same month, Thierry Burkhard, the French Army's chief of staff, said the following to the parliament. "We have bases in Senegal, Chad, Côte d'Ivoire, and Gabon. They're located in the capitals and sometimes even landlocked in expanding urban areas. Their footprint and visibility have become difficult to manage. We will probably have to change our implementation plan to reduce our vulnerabilities." He has a point, these factors posed great security concerns. Any large-scale protest or riot could easily be weaponized to blockade entire French military bases. And in many cases, with these bases now surrounded through this urban sprawl, they become more like traps than fortresses. Actually, let's go back to this story about Chad. Since its independence in 1960, Chad always maintained this love-hate relationship with France, its former colonizer. From the perspective of Paris, on one hand, Chad was seen as extremely loyal. As a matter of fact, the French Army's command and control center for operations in the Sahel was located in N'Djamena, right in the Chadian capital. On the other hand, there were always ups and downs in this relationship. Actually, former Colonel Michel Goya made an excellent post about it on Twitter. Essentially, the French military was urgently called for help when things went wrong, and then to leave quickly once the crisis had been resolved. For example, in 1965, only 5 years after independence, Chad demanded French forces to withdraw from certain rebel-held areas like the Tibesti Mountains. By 1968, the situation with the rebels had worsened, and the Chadian government immediately asked for French military assistance. Once the problem was handled, the French depart from the country. 1969, the year of love. Chad called for an immediate French military intervention because the rebels are back. And that's how 2,500 French soldiers were deployed in Chad. By 1972, it was mission accomplished. Chad kindly demanded the French to leave to regain its true independence. In 1975, after a coup that deposed President François Tombalbaye, the new Chadian government demanded the departure of the French Reserve Battalion that stayed in N'Djamena. Can you guess what happened next? Yeah, exactly. 2 years later, the Libyan-backed Tubu rebels in the north gained ground. That's right, Chad called for an urgent French military intervention. Chad just couldn't get enough of that French. It was like with a toxic ex, always break up and make up. By 1980, the political situation in Chad spiraled out of control, it was chaos. And the French said, GG well played, time to go, for real! Nope, in 1983, Gaddafi's Libya openly supported the rebels, which now advanced towards the capital. Now France is like, okay, time to solve the problem once and for all. 3,000 soldiers are deployed to Chad. After the rebels got their cheeks clapped, part of the peace terms demanded the departure of French military personnel. But the other part was for Libyan military personnel to also withdraw out of Chad, which they didn't do. Round 2 in 1986 with the famous Toyota War. This time Libya launched its own expeditionary force of over 8,000 soldiers and 300 tanks, which were now heading straight towards N'Djamena. You're all familiar with the aftermath of this invasion force, tanks burnt up in the desert. But what people don't know is that all this was made possible thanks to French military support. French air superiority enabled the Chadian army to locate Libyan armored columns, which were then weakened by never-ending airstrikes. On the ground, Chadian forces were reinforced with MX-10RC and ERC-90 wheeled light tanks. Additionally, Chadian troops received a significant number of French mortars and anti-tank weapons, like the Milan mounted on pickup trucks. 3 years after this stunning victory on Libya, in 1990, Idriss Déby became Chad's new president. He developed a close alliance with Paris, and French troops have maintained their presence in Chad ever since, thus opening the road for some stability. Overall, the French military paid a heavy price in all these operations to defend the Chadian government, with 153 fallen soldiers, of which 93 official KIA Mort pour la France between 1968 and 2011. Oh yeah, 2011, yeah. Yeah, because in 2008, a new group of rebels actually managed to storm the capital and even besiege the presidential palace. Once again, after the intervention of the French cavalry, Déby's forces managed to repulse the rebels after heavy fighting. To return the favor, Déby deployed thousands of Chadian soldiers in Mali in support of the French Operation Barkhane, which by the way suffered hundreds of casualties there. Then suddenly in 2021, Chad's president Idriss Déby dies after clashes with rebels. He fell at the age of 68 during an ambush with some rebels, weapon in his hand like a true soldier. We can say that he was a real Chad. The reality is that everything changed when his son Mahatmat Idriss Déby took over the presidency of the country. Not only did he face some sort of succession crisis, he also didn't seem to have the same attachment towards France as his father did. He was open to look for new security partnerships. That's on top of France's alleged reluctance to support N'Djamena in an operation against the jihadist group Boko Haram and disagreements over the Sudanese crisis. But to make sure everybody's good, in February 2024, French President Emmanuel Macron appointed Jean-Marie Bockel as personal envoy to Africa to discuss the future of French military presence on the continent. One reason for Bockel's appointment was his stance on the African question. In 2008, he supposedly said, "I want to sign the death certificate of the France Afrique." In other words, the relationship between France and its former African colonies. Another could be his emotional ties to the Sahel region. On the 25th of November 2019, one of his two sons, 28-year-old Lieutenant Pierre Emmanuel, died in a helicopter crash in Mali. What had to happen, happened. Chad didn't wait to get dumped, so they pressed the red button first. On the 29th of November 2024, Chad cuts military agreement with France. This was a real humiliation for France. What shocked French policymakers was the speed of this decision by Mahatma Idris Deby. For a long time, France had already voiced its intention to decrease its military personnel in Chad from 1,000 to 300. The French military command expected some sort of gradual pullout, not an abrupt end of playtime like what happened. 3 weeks later, by the 20th of December, France had already started to withdraw its troops from Chad. Since the country is landlocked, it was a logistics nightmare. Most of the equipment and personnel had to be moved out by air, while the rest had to be transported by cargo, and this required a transit across Cameroon. France was also hoping that it might actually reach an agreement to maintain some sort of smaller presence in Chad, like it did so often in the past. But now Paris had to go into the fast lane.
Another fuck up. Another fuck up.
France was just recovering from its geopolitical debacle in Africa, plus all the logistics headache that came with it. That 1 week later, on the 27th of December, Senegal says it's closing all foreign military bases. I mean, it was a euphemism, because Senegal doesn't have any other foreign military presence apart from France. So they got ejected, but in a very polite way. Thing is, just like in Chad, France had already planned to reduce its military presence in Senegal throughout 2023, decreasing its forces from 350 to 100 troops. To be fair, there were also some diplomatic blunders. The first blunder involved France supporting the brutal repression of President Macky Sall against protesters and the imprisonment of a political opponent named Ousmane Sonko. Thing is, in March 2024, Macky Sall lost the presidential election and was replaced by Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who then named Ousmane Sonko as prime minister. Let's just say he had a very good reason to hold a grudge against Paris. Already then, the first rumors appeared of a French military withdrawal from Senegal, and I will show you the brilliant, superior minds of fact-checkers of French mainstream TV. No, Bassirou Diomaye Faye did not demand the withdrawal of French troops from Senegal. It's all fake, baseless conspiracy theories.
A few moments later,
Faye told France 2 on Thursday that France will have to close its military bases in Senegal.
And the second one involved Mélenchon, a far-left French presidential candidate. Okay, this one is pretty funny. In May 2024, he was invited to hold a speech in the Cheikh Anta Diop University, where he proudly stated how France is such a terrible country, colonialism, slavery, whatnot. And then he also stated how he voted in favor of gay marriage in France and hoped Senegal does the same thing one day. Yeah, let's say he got booed off the stage. That same evening, Senegal, Prime Minister questions the presence of French military bases on the territory. I mean, with everything that happened in the region, the writing was on the wall, especially with this new generation of African leaders. And let's be honest, Senegal doesn't face any threats that require French military presence in the country. During the last days of 2024, as everybody was getting ready for the new year, the French armed forces were dealing with the withdrawal from Chad and now Senegal, meaning a lot more military equipment had to be rerouted. When, all of a sudden, on New Year's Eve, the 83-year-old president of Côte d'Ivoire, the old generation, kindly asked the 1,000 French military personnel present in the country to leave within the next month.
Nous avons décidé du retrait concerté et organisé des forces françaises en Côte d'Ivoire.
What was Jean-Marie Bockel doing this entire time? Other countries he visited are now kicking out the French military. Once it will be handed over, the French Port-Bouët military base will be renamed after General Thomas Dakin Ouattara, who was the first chief of staff of the independent Ivorian army. France was kicked out by some of its most loyal partners in Africa. It's like when all your girlfriends dump you at the same time. It really hurts your ego. And you sit in the corner and you're like, what did I do wrong? Jokes aside, France is not a colonizing power. And that's what they wanted to prove to the entire continent. France cannot forcefully remain in countries where they're unwanted by both the population and the government. Although many like to talk about colonialism, it's always these African governments that ask help from France to stay in power. Since 1963, the French military has lost approximately 314 soldiers KIA during its operations in Africa. France indeed paid a heavy price. Hence this speech by Macron on the 6th of January 2025.
Nous avions une relation sécuritaire. Elle était de deux natures en vérité. Il y a une partie, c'était notre engagement contre le terrorisme depuis 2013. On avait raison. Je crois qu'on a oublié de nous dire merci. C'est pas grave, ça viendra avec le temps. Aucun d'entre eux ne serait aujourd'hui avec un pays souverain si l'armée française ne s'était pas déployée dans cette région.
What he says is factually correct. As a reminder, in 2008, the strategic Livre Blanc document published by the French government to outline the country's defense policy had already planned to only maintain 2 permanent bases in Africa, namely one in Gabon and another in Djibouti. It's the rise of jihadist rebels and the call for help from African leaders that changed all the plans. As a matter of fact, Operation Barkhane in the Sahel cost the lives of 58 French soldiers, and no African countries recognized the sacrifice of French troops. And in that case, it's time to go, for good and without looking back. Anyway, the Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, they now all have a new sugar daddy. They prefer Russia as their new security partner. But that also means a lot more responsibility for Moscow. In mid-January, Russia reinforced its position in the Sahel region. An entire convoy of 100 vehicles was spotted in the streets of Bamako, the capital of Mali. About half the vehicles were trucks, but also included 60 armored vehicles, of which numerous T-72BM tanks, and various infantry fighting vehicles. Essentially enough to equip a Russian battalion tactical group. Could it be the equipment that was previously stored in Syria? At the same time, for Russia, it's a good deal. The job of Russian mercenaries is super simple. Protect the president of this African country and protect all the mining sites. This is where they get all the money. But I guess that's okay. That's not colonialism. That's not exploiting a country's resources. Now, what's next? At this moment, France will maintain its military presence in Gabon, although this force of 350 soldiers will also be reduced to 100 very soon. Additionally, this French military presence in Gabon will turn to training. To this, we can add another 1,500 men deployed in Djibouti. Still, what a contrast. In January 2022, there were still 8,000 French soldiers deployed across Africa, almost an entire division. 2025, 3 years later, less than 2,000 remain, and soon it will once again decrease to just above 1,500. My friends, it's really the end of an era. There are also rumors of a French military base in Nigeria, but as of now, nothing concrete, it's only speculation. Meanwhile, the French army will strengthen its presence in the United Arab Emirates. France currently has about 750 troops deployed there, including a squadron of 6 Rafale, as well as the 5th Armored Regiment. To this, France's Minister of the Armed Forces stated, "This is an opportunity for me to announce that starting in 2025, France will strengthen its military presence in the Emirates, where we have a land-air-sea base in Abu Dhabi." I mean, that's a good deal. The French picked a good spot. In summary, the Emirates are politically stable and they're not a former colony, which opens the path for a new era of military cooperation for France. And another benefit is that they have Dubai 1 hour away, which is good for relaxation. In the intro, I told you that France really likes this flag. Apart from being the flag of Chad, in spring 2025, France is planning to deploy an entire armored brigade of about 7,500 men to Romania. More on that in the next video. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon and PayPal. The links are in the description below.